Hi, I'm Chris Grimm, founder, coach, principal consultant of ARIA Consulting. For 24 years, we've been serving leaders and their teams around the world. This podcast, which I wanted to call The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, but it's called And Then I, is nothing scripted, nothing fancy. I promise that we'll be talking about successes and failures. It's the gold, I call it, that you find only in real stories with real leaders in real time. With that, I invite you to sit back, soak up the wisdom here of these everyday superheroes. Enjoy. Hi, everybody. It's Chris Grimm from ARIA Consulting, here with another episode of And Then I, with two awesome humans, the amazing Amy Smith, who I've known since 1993, and we will talk more about that, and someone she's known and loved for a very long time, Kizior, an amazing, God, I said that word a lot, but I don't even know what else to say, like superhero amazing. I'm going to jump right in. Amy, why don't you introduce yourself, and then you can pass the baton to Kara.
Sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, we have such a long history. Hey, you guys, I'm Amy Smith, and gosh, I have spent most of my career learning, developing, helping people achieve their goals. So I currently work with a pretty cool company. We're based in Nashville, Tennessee. It's called Business Made Simple. And we are certifying business coaches, but it's a really fun thing that we're doing. But, I think, we'll talk more about this later, but so many of my experiences throughout my career, whether in leadership positions or coaching and training, working in technology, have really led up to what I'm doing now. And it's really been a really interesting journey. And, you can kind of connect those dots and see how I got here. But enough about me. I'm really excited for you guys to meet Kara Kizior. She is just an incredible human being and somebody I've known for a really long time and just had the opportunity to be a very good friend, a dear friend, but also watch her really kick some butt in the world, in her career and all of her really cool accomplishments and what she's done. So, no pressure, Kara. I'll just turn it over to you.
Oh, thanks, Amy, for the fabulous introduction, and Chris as well. Thank you so much. I am super excited about this podcast and getting to talk to you guys and all of our listeners out there. My name is Kara Kizior. I have been working around technology since I got out of school. I started with some startup companies for the first 10 years or so of my career. I went to a Fortune 100 company for a very long time, and now I'm at a smaller consulting firm based outside of Chicago in one of the suburbs. I am the corporate vice president of digital services, and I've really, when I look back at my career and all of the experiences I have, oh my gosh, it's so much fun. And I can't wait to see what comes next. And so the thing I get really excited about is talking about leadership and development and getting the best out of people, and for sure women, but I just love working with teams and, continuing to learn and grow. So thank you so much for inviting me. I'm going to have a great time, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I'm thrilled to have both of you. If this is for listeners and people who are viewing on YouTube, if this is the first time you've joined us, the goal of And Then I is to have leaders talking about real life, because I really feel like oftentimes in training programs or books, those things get watered down and you don't get like the good, the bad, and the ugly of our experiences. So, Amy, Kara, today I want to talk about a few things off camera. Everybody, full transparency. I was telling them that they both have really like breadth and depth of experience all through their careers at different levels of leadership and as individual contributors, in the world of technology. And I think we take for granted in 2021, I will just tell you that most people I coach, regardless of their level, we're just used to the digital world. But we all have enough experience that we were there kind of in the beginning of that. So I'll just let the two of you kind of decide where we start from. But, what lessons can you share? What are you willing to talk about, knowing that we have people of all levels who use our resources and are always looking for help, how to be better, how to be a better manager, how to be a better leader.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's even so relevant nowadays, right? There are so many tools out there that can improve communication. It can make you more connected. And I think one of the challenges always is that the tools cannot replace the person and the leader and the person on the team and your contribution. It should augment. I think it is a bit of a balance, and you need to be very deliberate about making sure the tools are enhancing your contribution to a team, whether you're, a team member or working with people, and, just your style and how you work within, how can you lead with that? I think it's one of the most important things to keep in mind. I think the second thing is having empathy for people and their situations. They're more than work, right? They're more than their job. And the more they feel like they're a little understood, I think it goes a really long way for just having a little bit of, as Amy likes to say, grace for the moment and for people and what they're going through. So, some of those things have not changed. I think some of it's amplified nowadays. And I think it's a really important way to balance that.
Mm-hmm. As you were talking, I'm thinking, wow, 2020, right? The year we all crashed into the digital world, I feel like. So it's interesting as you were talking about like communication tools. I'm like, this has become normal.
Yeah. Yes, it has.
And most of us aren't that good at it still.
Yes. And then how many
So
other
I love that
screens
you're
you have
talking
in
about
front of
that.
you right now? You probably have your phone close by. You probably have another computer close by. There is no shortage of ways that people are communicating. Right. Exactly. And you really have to focus, like right now, because, we're being, on camera, you have to focus and be engaged and be here now and try not to get distracted, which is another really tough thing that, everyone has to balance, because when you're the person sending the message, you're like, well, how come they're not responding? I just sent it 5 seconds ago, right? Like, Amy, where are you at? She's like, I am early still, so, it's that expectation of always on and constant response, and, being able to get a hold of anyone at any time is also the other side of that communication that I think we have to balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people are struggling with that. As I think about people that I coach, this seems to be a theme, right? How do we find a balance now that work is in most people's homes? Yeah. Someone said to me the other day, because they took a staycation, and she was saying, this is a pretty high level executive of a major brand that I can't really mention, but she was saying, it was super hard to have the discipline to staycation when every meeting that was on her calendar that she was trying to ignore was just a Zoom away.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I'll just log in. No. So yeah, I think our world has changed. Our world has changed. How about you, Aim? What's happening in your universe right now, as far as the programs you're doing, and what themes are coming up from the businesses that you're working with?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm working with this company, working in this company, and we are in a growth mode right now. So it's really, it's my sweet spot. I love being with the company and their growth mode. But there's the thing that is great about it is also the challenge about it, right? Because sometimes you're moving so fast and it can feel a little chaotic or, unpredictable. And so I think it's really trying to keep moving fast and slowing it down. But I'll share with you some themes that have been coming up, and it's really interesting because I also work with some really amazing, talented people, but they are probably early or mid-career. So it's really fun for me to kind of be able to talk with them and have these conversations, and also be able to share experiences. I was just meeting with somebody this morning, and what came up is this really big theme that I learned early in my career is you don't have to be the expert of everything in the company. I think so often leaders come in and they feel like, oh, I've got to know everything about revenue and product and marketing and sales, and I've got to be the expert in all the things. And I'm like, you don't. You just have to know how to ask the questions, and then how to sort of guide the conversation so that the key people or the key stakeholders can help solve the problem or address the issue. So I think that's what's really interesting, is that people are feeling this added pressure and responsibility to be the person who's I got to solve this. Like we were having a conversation about revenue and this, we have a pretty aggressive, sales revenue goal this year. And I'm like, you're not the person who's going to get us across the finish line. I said, you're the person who's going to help clear the path and help kind of keep people organized. So I think that is a really interesting theme. And then the other, and this sort of leads into my second thing that I'll share. And, I kind of learned this, Chris, from you and also from Cara in my career, but it's fun how it's coming up again. And it is surrounding yourself with really great people that you can trust. It's amazing. Both you and Cara have been huge mentors to me in my career, but it's, sometimes you've got to have people that you can go to just to talk to. You've got those people I can vent to, right? I got to talk about, I had a really bad day or I'm really frustrated. I've got to talk, or I've got to go to somebody I can help think strategy through, or, maybe I'm having a personal professional issue. So I think that's what's really important too, is who's your squad, right? Who are your people that your go-to for different needs that you have in your life. And then also you can be there for them. So I would say those are really two of the big, as we're having this conversation, that's what's coming to mind for me.
That's great. Cara, what about you? And you can go anywhere. You've got so much experience, and maybe from now or even in that Fortune 100, which I'm sure had complexities and a whole bunch of fun.
Yes. Yeah. One of the areas that we, Amy and I had talked about, we talk all the time, and we were talking about, impactful situations that kind of changes your trajectory, right? And I think that it was really fun for me to look back and think through that, because all of the stories that came to mind, I still think about to this day. I still use as coaching moments. And so when I got out of, I should go all the way back to high school, if you can believe that. But my dad was really adamant that we try to get summer jobs in businesses. So my first job was as an admin at Motorola. I was a sophomore in college. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. But I had a really tough person that I worked for. It was a woman. She was in the engineering side. So she was highly outnumbered because it was, in the 80s. So it was really tough. Like she would sit in her office and scream at me outside, and people on the floor that I didn't know would come by and, and apologize. Well, and I stuck it out, and I'm like, I'm going to learn, I'll figure this out. And by the end of the summer, she had me working with HR to do the interviews and hire my permanent replacement. It was such an impactful experience at 19 to be doing that. I couldn't even believe it. And then I went back summer after summer and a couple winter breaks and continued to work with the person I picked and a couple of the other admins. And it was really interesting. I think about them all the time. And then when I finished grad school, the job market was a little tough and I was still interviewing, but I was like, I can't sit around. So I went back to the temp agency and I'm like, I just need some work until I, land my first full-time job. And they said, okay, go to the front desk, ask for Pat. They'll take you up to, the department. I'm like, great. So I show up and I see a woman walking toward me. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Patricia. It's not Patrick. And, first of all, then I was like, shame on me that I assumed it was a man and not a woman, because she was the VP, of the team. And in my head, I was like, if she's like the other one, I'm not staying. And so within about an hour, I'm like, oh, I love her. So the first project she put me on, her team had just achieved some big goal. She's like, you're going to help me plan a thank you party. And her team was almost all women. And it was just she was so lovely, so gracious, the way she talked about her team. And it was, again, this really important juxtaposition, two very powerful women who had made, gone far in their career for that time. And it really made me continue to think about taking a step back. What does that mean? What kind of leader do I want to be or not be? And she helped me pick my first job, and she set me a plan on my first day, and I still have that plan. So I think about her all the time. And so I ended up going to all startup companies for the first 10 years of my career. I did not want to be bored. I was petrified of being bored. So I wanted the variety, the broad view of, what was going on. I was a little reluctant to go to a big company, and I ended up going, and I was like, no way, I'm not staying here. 3 months in, I'm like, they want me to specialize and they move too slow. Well, what that did was it made me change how I thought about staying there. I'm like, all right, well, I'm not gonna leave this size company until I can get the benefit from working at this size company, because otherwise, what's the point? So I looked for very, high profile, risky jobs because I wanted to accelerate my learning, and it just fed me. I stayed there for 15 years almost. I mean, and I ran big projects, and it was a great experience. Yeah. Then I was able to take about a year off, which is awesome if anybody could figure out how to do that. So that worked out really well. And now I'm at a mid-sized consulting firm, very established, and I'm kind of going back to my roots on the smaller side. And I love being able to take all those lessons because, as you said at the opening, it has, all of your experiences have brought you to where you are. And for as much as it kind of winged it along the way, for sure. It wasn't a very thought out career path, but I definitely had themes that I constantly gravitated toward my entire life. And that included the consumer experience. So the big company I worked for was McDonald's, and I really could appreciate on all the projects I did, the end consumer, the end person that was going to use the project that I was on. And that really kind of weaved me into the digital space. And it's just, I think it's, I guess the advice or the way I would look at it is, go with what you love. Don't be so rigid about what you think you love and you don't love. Because there's so many great experiences that come from these different size companies, project teams, complexities, interests, or not, because we've all been on stinker projects too, that you're like, I'm never gonna do that again. But it's really been fun. And so I love working with people, coaching, brainstorming, coming up with different ideas for their situations, because there's always an idea in there. There's always going to be a silver lining. It's just how open are you to finding it, even on the bummer projects or the bummer roles or the companies that aren't working out. There's always something there that can help get you to that next spot that you want to be. It doesn't always have to be up.
Yeah.
Oh.
You said something a few minutes ago, and I want to go back to it and unpack it. And Amy, I know you'll have a version of this, so I'm warning you now that the ball is going to be tossed to you after I dig out this thing with Cara. And that is, and I think it's really important for our listeners and viewers, specifically if they're at an earlier time in their career than all of us, right? Is, you were saying that you were gravitating towards projects that were riskier.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about what that means and maybe what it meant then to you and what it might mean now, because I think that something I'm advocating for, and I'm assuming we're all aligned, is for more people to take a hold of their career earlier, and navigate their career on purpose and in more intentional ways than maybe some of us did. And we can talk about that too, because you mentioned it, right? But let's talk about that. What did it mean back then? What would look risky to you in a way that you would want to do that?
Yeah. So when I joined McDonald's, I think it was about a 45-year-old company at the time. And there were folks that had been there for their whole career, out of college, and they're still there 30 years later. And as the company was going through some leadership changes and going through kind of a technical, part of the technical evolution of, web and credit cards being more pervasive and all this different technology, things needed to work different, faster. And a lot of the folks that had been there for a long time are like, oh, this is going to be too risky. What if it doesn't go well? What if it crashes and burns? I don't want to be associated with that type of project. And in my mind, I'm like, but that's the new stuff. And here are the people I'm going to get to work with. And it is on the company's, and at the time I was in the US, so that it's on the company's strategy and objective for this year. So I really wanted to be on projects that were a top priority for driving the business value, because otherwise, what the heck are we doing? It's too hard for me to understand how am I contributing if it's too hidden, right? If it's out there, that's where I got super excited. And so I also really love the ambiguous space and bringing order to ambiguity. A lot of people get uncomfortable in that, and because it's not clear, what do I do next? It can get very overwhelming. And it's just a matter of knowing what are the next what are the next 3 things I think I need to do? So let's do that one and we'll double check. Is 2 and 3 still right? Or do we need to adjust a little bit? And we just keep, going that way. And for me, it was a very natural way of working through it, but not everyone thinks about it, which I then loved. I'm like, okay, I can help everybody. I can help you. We can figure out how to do this. And the first really decent sized project that I was on at McDonald's was there was no Wi-Fi, pervasive in the location, and that required some new connectivity. But then that was the driver for getting cashless credit and debit acceptance in all the locations. It's hard to believe, but up till then, it was very scattered on where you could use a credit card. And it was, how we had to deploy and the technology and the setup and all the other things, and working in a franchise organization was just appropriately messy. I just loved it. It was hard. It was such hard work. But that, to me, that was there were many people who had been asked to do this role, and it was just too scary to be on something that was that critical to the company, and that new and that pace, and so exposed from their perspective that they weren't really comfortable taking the risk. And I think I just saw, well, I see these leaders, they need to be successful too. They're going to help us be successful. They have something in it too. I'm not going rogue saying, hey, we got to put cashless on the locations, right? So I think it's, just making sure that you're looking around you, upside down, peer wise, are you going to be surrounded by people who want the project to succeed? If so, then, you're halfway there, you're halfway there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So much awesome experience that we have here. And what about you? I can't wait to hear this. Did you gravitate towards risky? Did you stay away from risky? Like, tell us your version of that story.
Yeah. And, let me just, before I do that, I feel like Cara isn't, well, she's very humble, but I think she's also, just for people who are listening, just to kind of understand the scope, because I was on this journey with her, because I would remember as you were launching cashless, and you guys, this was big. This was in the early 2000s, right? So
right.
Just to kind of take you on that journey, it's, before the Internet of Things, and it's before, you had that ease and accessibility. And then,
it was kind of like you were a heretic a little bit, right? Like I mean, even as a company, cashless was kind of unheard of.
Yeah, there were some really smart people who did the business case, got it sold in. It was really complicated. The whole franchise organization makes it so complicated. And then and now we've got to get it out there, right? It's phase 2 of hard, right? Phase 1 of hard is sell the business case. Phase 2 of hard, now we got to get it out there. And I was on phase 2 of hard. And again, really, extremely bright people to work with.
That's also, I'm going to tell you something else. You also did this globally. So this wasn't just a US launch. For you guys listening, Cara has traveled all over the world to launch, to see this project grow, and it also the evolution of that project. So, having done that, in the time that I spent at Apple, when you go and launch a new country, or you take a product there, that's a whole nother set of complications or things that you have to unlaunch. So I just don't want to I just want to say that what you're talking about, you communicate in a very clear and simple way, but there was a lot of work and effort, and it was very complex.
Thank you. Yes. And you're hitting on it. And I know you had great global experience too, opening up new markets. Consumers are different than the US consumers. What? We have other things that we have to consider. I mean, just a much more global empathy for not everyone's the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
As the US, for sure.
But for our listeners and viewers, I would just like to take this moment and acknowledge, so it finally opened itself up, because I didn't want to say it in the beginning. When I said superhumans, I meant it. Like, right now, the collective experience of, if we just took what you just mentioned, Amy and Cara, like opening businesses or taking a business change and deploying it in another country, is a big deal, listeners and viewers. So if you are in a time in your career where you're even considering that, what these two have done is amazing. And by the way, I've been a consultant longer than I've had a real job now, because I've been doing this 24 years. So oftentimes I get to kind of come in and out to help do those things. But what you both have done, I mean, Amy, you've hired and opened Apple stores around the world. And Carl, like you're saying, you did the pull through of a number of initiatives. And so listeners and viewers, you can not only thank them for Apple Store and McDonald's experiences, but also what they're saying is real. Like the experience of that is, you know, it's not a normal hard.
Yeah. And I would
It's
say
not a normal risky. It's just not. There's domestic normal.
agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if any listeners has an opportunity to do a global job, do it. It's hard for a while, but you got to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it takes, and maybe Amy, you want to go there because I want to go back to the risky question to you. I mean, you actually have to be intentional, right? You can't go blind into a global role.
No, not at all. And I think, you know, was I intentionally risky? I think early in my career, I was probably just foolish. You know, I was, but in a really good way. I was willing and open to these new experiences and opportunities because they were excited. I'm like, oh, this sounds like fun. And it just spoke to the things that I enjoyed doing. Did I get to work with people? Was there an element of training? Was there an element of like leading teams and helping? And, you know, it checked a lot of boxes for me. And so, you know, and here's what's really interesting. It probably wasn't until the last 10 years where I actually paused and I looked back on my career. And I think I had read some article and it was like, you know, as you're trying to find out sort of your, you know, your purpose and your why, kind of look back at your experiences and find the common thread. And it's so funny. It's like I knew it, but I never named it. But when I did look back, you know, there was always this element of teaching and helping people. And it shows up every job I've ever had with any company, you know, and all those experiences, that was my theme, right? And it continues. And I was like, that's why, right? I wish I would have, you know, it'd be nice to have that sort of knowledge when you head into your career, but I didn't know. But so yes. So I think, you know, I feel like my career was very serendipitous. You know, I started with, you know, I was always initially in the first part of my career and always some form of retail. And then I, you know, was with a startup company, which is where you and I met, Chris. And that was a crazy, fun time. But we also had the opportunity to make mistakes and it was okay. Like it was the perfect sort of training ground for trial and error. It's like, let's try this. Okay, let's try this. And so that was really fun. And I think I also was at a point in my life where I was willing to say yes to things. So I actually, you know, a kind of another sort of theme in my life, I moved and traveled a lot. You know, yeah. I tell people, I'm like, I've lived in a couple of countries. I've lived in like 7 or 8 different cities. I've moved like, you know, almost 30 times since I got out of college. Like, but that was fun for me. So that also enabled me to take on a lot of really interesting opportunities. So I think for me, as I look at my career, I was challenged by the work, but it was also coupled that it fulfilled me personally. So I knew early on, I love travel. I loved new experiences and new people. So anytime that sort of situation would present itself, you know, and I could check all those boxes, I was in. I was like, let's do it. So I don't know, does that feel like that answers kind of talk about risky? It felt like a risk I wanted to take. It wasn't. And I think there are 2 times in my career where I took a risk because I listened to other people and not to my instinct and my gut. And they ended up being really big mistakes. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think I listened to people told me, yep, you should totally do this. You know, we all think you should do it. And they were people that I worked for, right? They were people that had more experience and knowledge. I was like, okay. And those were 2 really hard lessons to learn. I was like, I can't, and I won't do it again. Right. So yeah. So I think that's the other part that's interesting too is, you know, Kara, you mentioned this, it's like doing what you love and what sort of feeds your soul, and having that challenge, but also learning to have the confidence to trust in you and to trust your thinking and your gut and your instincts too.
Yeah, even if you're afraid it's going to disappoint somebody, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because when you have leaders or managers or, saying, Amy, we think you can do this, it'll be a big help to us, right? There was some component there and you're a helper and you're like, well, I want to help, I want to be a team player. I want to, contribute where I can, but at the same time, if it doesn't feel good to you, right, your gut, you have to listen to your gut. Yeah, you gotta listen to your gut. And if your gut is unclear, try it. If it's like, I'm not sure, do I want to, I don't know, give it a shot. What's the worst that could happen? You've got a great experience to talk about and, you can, hopefully pretty easily find another opportunity that fits you better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that it's so interesting as both of you were talking, I was thinking about, this is an interesting time, and I'll just share my own experience, right? Which is 24 years I've been coaching people. So it's been 24 years, Amy, since the days we were together at Right Start.
When I was 10.
When you were 10, that seems like a minute ago. But in that 24 years, probably the first 10 years, I worked mostly with men. Because when you're doing team development and coaching and consulting, at the top of the house, if you will, VP level and above, that's where, historically, where the investment was for the kind of work that I do. And it was mostly men. And when I started to see that shift, it was interesting to experience, at least for me and our team members. And for a while, Amy worked for Aria, and we had some really great years there. So Amy, always, you can come back anytime now. But let me just say, not kidding. Anyway, I digress. What I learned, look, the journey of the female leader, I think has taken some interesting shifts, and I'll just be quiet in a minute, but my version of the story is, for like 10 years, the only women I worked with were usually fairly junior, and, or like you're saying, Cara, when I would find a place that maybe had a woman leader who usually were super strong, because they had grown up in male dominated cultures, unless they started their business from scratch, which was few and far between. They had fairly dominant, assertive behaviors, right? We were leading, in the male dominated world of leadership and trying to put female characteristics and behaviors in that. And then I feel like I started running into more female leaders in organizations the last 15 years or so, and watching kind of the dance we've been doing and trying to figure out, well, wait a minute, is there a different leadership style here? Is it a blended leadership style? What does that actually mean for the person and their team? And the reason I was saying it's interesting, because I feel like now, it's 2021. So regardless of when you're listening or watching this, so, it's August of 2021. And, now there's a very different conversation about leadership, about diversity, inclusion, and what it means to have different styles in leadership. And, what is that doing to the model of leadership and the way we think about what great leadership means? And so now I'm working with leaders, both male and female, who are significantly less dominant and command and control or driving than we've had in the past. A lot more collaboration, a lot more openness. And I'd love to hear, both of your thoughts about this, because I think about, like, sometimes, like, what would I say to my younger self, and would I say something different now that I know what the world is today? I don't know that I would do anything different, but it would be interesting to hear you two think out loud about that.
Yeah, it's a great, the story that I told earlier about the two females. So early in my career, when I was at McDonald's, I had a female leader that I worked with for a very long time. And we butted heads a lot of times. And it wasn't always the smoothest relationship. I still use the lessons she taught me. I didn't love how she taught them to me, but I still was listening, because at the end of the day, I try to listen to people as if it's a transcript, right? Take the emotion out, take all of the, the positioning, and just try to listen to the words. It takes energy to do that, right? So after a while, it's like it drains you. It doesn't fill you, right? And I had an opportunity while I was in her group to work for another leader who was a male and super gregarious, nice, smart, had been around for a really long time. He had a very different approach to leading this really massive program. And I just, like a sponge, took in how he managed, and I watched how he interacted with different people. And we never, in this context, we never talked about diversity, but I absolutely saw him live I am interested in hearing from anybody about what could we do different, better. And he was constantly open. And I think at the end of the day, that is one of the hardest things to do, particularly if you want to execute and you get something done, is to say, I haven't finished hearing everything that I could about what should I do next, and being open to diversity of thought, right? And you just have to be open to it. And so for me, I think that's one of the biggest things, as we talk about the transition of how the leadership styles and what works well. I think that one has always been extremely influential for me. And I think we're seeing more of that. The more that people are able to do that, the less the gender and maybe some of the other things could become, because it's more about the words and the ideas and the input than it is about the body that's telling you.
That's great.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think, so, it's interesting for me. Empathy is probably something I have been very intentional to develop and cultivate as a leader. I think I have it in my personal life, but, sort of how I grew up, Chris, I think about you too. It's like how I grew up in leadership, and early on, the lessons I learned, empathy wasn't necessarily a valued competency or a valued, it was very different. And now what is fascinating to me is the workplace has changed. Obviously the way we're working now in this sort of hybrid of some remote, some is, back to, it's that continues to evolve and change, but also our workforce has changed. The people that are, entering in the workplace. And I think what I have learned, and I will share, I think as a leader, the one thing that you can do is to pay attention and be willing to have, I think it's a learner mindset. I think, be willing to recognize that the people that you work with or that are work for you, they have different needs now than they did a decade ago, right? I think now you think about the workplace, it's way more acceptable and it's way more the norm that you bring your whole self to work. It's no more, we don't have these buckets anymore of oh, I got to leave my private stuff at home. It's we used to have to separate that, but now, it really affects your whole life, right? If you've got something, happening in your personal life that's causing you anxiety and stress, it is absolutely going to filter into your work, and as a leader, being willing to afford people, the grace, but also, kind of recognizing that. So I think it's having the empathy or the willingness to sort of recognize that. And then, also recognizing people have changed. And I think as a leader, we always have the opportunity to learn. And, Cara, you said this earlier, to also we can do better. It's, I learned this idea, it was probably, I don't know, in the last 5 years or so, but it's, it's called reverse mentoring, right? And it was this sort of concept out there. And it's so funny because I was like, what is this reverse mentoring? And I absolutely, once I kind of dug into it and I'm like, I have so much to learn from different generations, from, people who either work for you, alongside of you, but they all bring a different sort of shared experience. And so there's probably something you can, learn, or an insight you can glean. So I also really like that. I'm constantly, I'm just a very curious leader, right? I've got a lot of curiosity, and I don't want to say just because it's the way it's always been done is the way that it needs to be done in the future. So I think, as a leader, that willingness to be adaptable, to have a learner mindset, and then also that empathy is actually super valuable. And it's a way that you can forge trust, and you strengthen relationships, and can create, really strong teams as well.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that we only have about 10 more minutes, but what I'd really love to hear from the two of you is, what's your go-to like disaster story? Work like, oh my God, this situation. And, oftentimes I have some of those stories, and Amy, I won't even waste our time telling it, but Amy, you're in my story, actually. You're not part of the bad part. But I think that's important, because oftentimes we tell those stories like this was a failure, this was a mistake, because there is a lot to learn. So to your point, Amy, about being a learner, and I like to model that for our viewers and listeners. So anybody willing to share one of those stories with us?
Disaster. Oh, Cara, you're going to have to go back into the reach. I'm sure there's one in there.
Oh, I have to have one. I know. I'm trying to think of which one is very, and I don't know if this is a great one, but I maybe it's the personality piece that I had to fight against, kind of. Maybe I'll think of a specific story. So it's not that I don't have them. I try to address it and change as quickly as I can. I think really early in my career, not even really early, maybe, 8, 10, 12 years into my career, I was very like, no, this is what we should do. And this is what we're going to do. And I would sort of listen. I'm like, yeah, but here's what we need to do. And the more projects you do, and the more, teams you're on, I realized how much that alienates people. And I the projects were less impactful. How we got there were less impactful, because there was, too much of it's my way, and I'm so busy and I don't have time to think of, about what you think or what we should do. And I really had to figure out that different points of view and ways to approach things could actually lighten the load, lighten the burden of the project. It actually, listening to more actually wasn't going to slow it down. It was actually going to unlock and make things a little bit easier to get done, less, maybe resistance, or maybe I said it the other way, more participation, excitement that people were participating. And it was a really hard thing for me to figure out, because I thought I knew the best way to do it. And I became more and more of like, I had to do it because I was making it my way. And as soon as I was able to realize to break it down, and there's one story, it's not quite a mess, but I was trying to figure out, how do I move forward with this person? It was a big program team. It was cross-functional. And we had moved into a new phase. So it was time to kind of reorganize the team. And we had been moving as a herd, as I like to call it. There was like 10 of us in every single stinking meeting, because as the beginning part of the project, we all had to listen for different reasons and different things. So there was a purpose. But once we got past this one major milestone, we could divide and conquer. But there was one person on the team who was adamant about being in everything, and she's starting to slow it down. And so I decided I was going to talk to every person one-on-one to hear what they thought worked best, what would they like to do different. So got a lot of feedback, and I saved the most difficult person for last, because I just didn't know what was going to happen. And so when I talked to her, she said the most enlightening thing to me, which was, she's like, Cara, I just don't want to be left out of a decision before you tell leadership, because I want to have an opportunity to weigh in to make sure that my team is getting what they need and everyone else. So I said, oh, okay. So if we break into smaller teams, we divide and conquer, and we come together and we say, hey, this is what we're going to take to leadership. This is our position. These are our recommendations. If you're a part of that conversation prior to, are you comfortable then not attending every meeting and work session? She's like, absolutely. I actually don't want to be in every meeting. And I was like, oh my God, this is brilliant. Why did I not think about that before? So that was like one where I was just could not figure out in my own way how to resolve it. And just by talking to people, just one-on-one, and really being open to hearing what are they trying to do and why, and getting you're going to find a very simple answer. And it made everyone's life easier. Everyone on the team was relaxed, anyway. So that was, I think it's just more of a build into, I was having lots of smaller, similar experiences and found a way to, and I do it to this day. So I make sure on every team, and no matter I like to do it at the beginning, but I also like to do it at midpoints or after some major accomplishment. Hey, let's just touch base. How are things going? What can we do different? I don't want to work that hard. I mean, how do we work more simply? People like to be a part of the solution, I would say generally.
Yeah.
So good. Lots of gold in there. I really appreciate that. Amy, what about you?
Well, I first also, Cara said something really interesting. I think it was yesterday we were talking. And what did you say, Cara? In consulting, you guys call it, is it opportunity rich or something?
Yes, opportunity rich environments.
That's so true. Yeah, AKA everybody listening, that means lots of problems here.
Lots of problems and disasters. And I also want to tell you, you guys, the way Cara operates, it does also transcend over into her personal life. You guys, I'm going to just tell you one of my fun favorite stories about Cara. And Cara, it's when we went on your 40th birthday trip to Charleston. You guys, this is great. So, and I'm sorry, because I'm just going to digress really quick because this is a fun story. But this is perfectly Cara. So Cara, when we all started, we have a group of about, I don't know, there's like 12 of us, and we've all been friends for years. And when we hit that milestone birthday of 40, there was this sort of agreement in the group. It just sort of happened very organically, but we started planning birthday trips. So if it was your birthday coming up, you planned the big group trip, and people could opt in or whatever, but there was always usually a long weekend, and there was always, we'd plan a couple of events, and there was always like at least one big dinner and all good stuff. Well, Cara decides to go to Charleston for her 40th. And the best part is, you guys, is prior to the trip, we all get a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet has all of our names on it, when we're arriving, when we're departing, who's in what room, a list of activities for each day, like what time we were meeting for breakfast, what event, we were going on, and this or that. So we were all very prepared for the trip. And I think there was one morning, I was staying in a room with a couple of people, and we were late to breakfast. Well,
oh, hey,
that was a problem.
It was a problem. Birthday girl said, be at breakfast. I just said that to my mom, by the way. They're going to Charleston this weekend. She's like, send it. I'm like, I got it.
You're like, I got a spreadsheet for you. So you guys, it happens. It's the best. Yes.
I love when project management comes over into real life.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's the best because Cara is amazing at that sort of project management. And I'm sort of like, oh, let's just figure it out. So it's actually a really nice compliment for the both of us. And it's actually served us well for 20 years in our friendship. I think real quick, disaster wise, goodness gracious, I could think of a number of, when things just did not go well. Were they disasters? Probably to some extent. And I'll tell you what it really, the common theme for me in there was just not asking for help. Like, I think so often, and I just experienced this with somebody recently, you kind of get in over your head and you feel like you're like, if I ask for help, they're going to see that I'm weak or that I'm incompetent or I can't do it. And I can tell you, I felt like that so many times in my career. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to show that, right? Because I don't want to, but what I have learned is it actually is really empowering when you admit or can say, hey, I'm stuck. I'm not really quite sure if I've got this. I made this mistake. I didn't mean to, but I'm going to own it and let's move forward. And I now learn, I'm like, Chris, you have one of my very favorite sayings, and can I say it on the podcast?
Sure. I don't even know what it is, but go ahead.
It's the one that's on the website, on the Area Coach website.
Everyone's a shit show?
Yeah. Yeah. It is.
There it is.
Yeah. You guys, that is probably the best advice I have gotten. It's right up there with like those golden nuggets. And it sort of just takes the pressure off. It's like, hey, we are all some version of a shit show and we're all figuring it out. And when you can bring that out into the light and sort of name it and say it, then that allows you to sort of take that perfectionism or that people pleaser away and go, hey, I'm human too. You're human. We kind of had this shared experience and we can figure it out. But I also find people, and especially your teams, will really respect you because all of a sudden you're relatable to them, and they will respect and trust that. So I think that's the biggest thing. A lot of times disasters happened for me because I was trying to like just figure it out and hide it and feel like I could eventually, and then it just got, you couldn't do it anymore and it just blew up. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So,
we've run out of time, but before I close this, I just want to say to the two of you, we've been, doing some changes on our marketing and digital. And so I had some time to reflect on, in 2020, I had done a podcast with Nick Vujicic called Leadership Now. We had 18 episodes. And then we're about, I think this is our 11th of And Then I. And so what you're saying, both of you, is interesting because if I were to pick the themes that come out in almost every leadership conversation, somewhere in there, almost everybody says what you're saying, both of you, right? Like, the empathy, taking a learning mindset. And, it sounds trite. It's also a little boring, almost like that we're all saying the same thing. But I think that, if we put this under the category of advice for our younger, earlier career selves,
yeah,
I think it stands as really strong advice, right? Because like I said, I've been listening over to some of these podcasts and I'm like, if we can just get to people sooner, right? Like really learn how to do this earlier, and it makes such a difference. Because I know, and I won't waste everybody's time, and I do need to close this up, but I even look back on, I was telling Amy, I've got some stories and you're in some of them, but the real story about my learning was the arrogance and the difficulty I had, not just listening like you, Cara, but also getting past that. Even in situations where I was right, the delivery of that and the process around, like both of you have said, right? So I'm kind of reiterating it, but also just emphasizing everybody to who's listening and watching, that if there are some lessons here, these are big ones. And they're not light switches, right? Like they're things that you have to actually practice, because when you're in your default mode, you actually think you're doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yes. I agree. And, you triggered another thought for me too, when you said, some of these things, the being a, learning mindset and all the themes that you pulled out. And I think by practicing those things earlier in your career, you will find your path to your happiness better. You can't compete with somebody else you're working with on like, oh, that's their objectives and what they want to be, and this is the level they want to be at this time. And it took me a very long time to say, hey, Cara, you're competing with this person in your mind, but yet you don't want what they're trying to go for. So why are you even thinking about that? That's not even the path that you want to be on. So I think by doing these, to your point, earlier in your career, you will find your path to your happiness along the way a little bit less, maybe with a little less anxiety, because it will lead you to what's the right thing for you at that time. And what works for you in the next 5 years is going to be very different than what works for you in the following 5 years. So be okay with that. And, just be true, just listen to yourself, and you're going to wind up exactly where you want to be and be happy with it.
Look, that's a drop the mic. And I feel like I'm gonna put a period, but I want to say, I think we need part 2, because you just opened up, Cara, the happiness thing. I don't know yet that we've had a podcast about this, but I do think there is a conversation to be had around learning to integrate success and happiness
Yes.
in your work, in your life. And boy, is that something we all have to learn, for sure.
Yes.
There's some unlearning that goes along with that.
Yes, there is. Yes,
right? There's a whole
absolutely.
bunch of things to let go of. Okay, awesome, people. I just want to say thank you again. This went by very, very quickly. All of a sudden, I looked at the clock and I'm like, whoa, we've been here a long time. So that means it's amazing. And people are going to get a lot of, like I said, gold from this. So I want to say thank you. I want to say, please, 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 let's do a part 2. And
Do I get to come back?
Yes.
of course you get to come back. What you don't know, because Gus will probably, the awesome Gus will edit it out, is that Amy does our take 1 and take 2. Amy, do you want to just have one that we close out with?
Yes. All right. Hey, Gus. All right. Guys, it's been amazing.
Gus.
It's been amazing.
This is the end. Take.
I think that's a wrap.
Oh,
That's right.
okay, guys. That's a wrap.
Okay, everybody, we hope you'll join us for another episode of Then I, and Amy, Cara, have a wonderful rest of your day and weekend. It's a Friday. Woo-hoo.
Yay, thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's been great.
Yeah, thank
All right,
you.
are we waving? We're waving.
Waving. Bye.